handbags were in the front, but they were covered by your two coats.
Yes, sir, I did.
You heard Mrs. Scriabin testify. She never saw those handbags.
That is correct.
She did see the briefcase, which was under the coats. Recall her testifying about that.
Yes, I do.
But you're saying she didn't see the handbags.
The handbags were underneath everything,
Okay.
which is why I forgot to give it to them. I didn't see them either.
You didn't see them?
At the time while I was there, I had forgotten that they were there, and I did not see them under the briefcase in place. No, sir.
Mr. Hightower, you cleaned out the contents of the glove compartment of the car and gave it to them. You gave them Ernie's wallet and all his identification.
That is correct.
You specifically took them down there to try to convince them that the Brendells had been kidnapped. And now you're telling us that Alice's two pocketbooks, which are on the front passenger side of the Toyota, that you didn't remember them or see them?
No, sir. I told you there's a lot of things I forgot, sir.
Well, you made a specific attempt to provide them with personal information about the Brendells and give them their personal belongings.
Yes, sir.
Yet you knew that you had Alice's own handbag and her straw carrying bag on the front passenger door of the car.
Yes, sir.
You didn't give them to her?
No, sir.
You just forgot about those. Christine testified. She said the only thing she saw under that coat, because she looked under it, was the briefcase. You did have that with you, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, in your direct testimony, you said you told for photographs. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, repeat.
I said, on your direct testimony, you indicated that you posed for photographs.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's not the truth, is it?
Yes, sir, it is.
You heard Christine Scriabin testify that she never asked you to pose for any photographs. She didn't even tell you she was going to take them.
She asked if she could take my picture. She asked for identification. She wanted to make sure that I was not trying to run a scam on her. She told me that specifically, sir.
Now, I seem to recall her direct testimony was that she never told you she was going to take photographs. She just went and got the camera and came back into the room and just snapped your picture. And you're telling us that she's incorrect.
I'm telling you, I sat there and allowed her to take my picture.
Now, during the time you were at the Scriabins, they asked you if you would give them a statement. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
And you went up to where the computer was, and you dictated a statement to Christine. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
She typed it as you were dictating it?
Yes, sir.
And this was so that they would know about what happened. You have a memorialized record of what you were telling them. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you relayed the story about the kidnapping to them and so forth, right?
As much as I could remember, yes, sir.
This is a good time break for us to find
First, let me ask you a question, Mr. Hightower.
Yes.
How long prior to September 1991 have you lived in Barrington?
Since 1986, sir.
Since 1986 to September 1991, in the town of Barrington, had you ever seen one or two 6'1" Chinese people?
Yes, sir.
You have?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. You may step down.
Christopher Hightower leaving the stand after an hour or so of cross-examination by prosecutor Mike Stone. This morning, Christopher Hightower's story didn't hold up too well under cross-examination. He appeared to get confused. At one point, he told Mike Stone that he had been told by the killers/kidnappers to ask for $300,000 in ransom, but he only asked Christine Scriabin, Ernest Brendell's sister, for $75,000. Then he said he was doing what he was told, but in fact later had to admit that wasn't what he was told. The story seemed to get a little bit mixed up. He'll resume his testimony on cross-examination after a very short recess, which right now the judge has given to the jury and members of the court. Frank?
Diana, did I also glean a little bit of new information in that now supposedly, according to Hightower, one of the killers/kidnappers was with him in the woods when he disposed of the crossbow, or had that been said earlier?
That had not been said earlier. On his direct testimony, Christopher Hightower tearfully recounted what was happening on that Sunday when he drove up to Connecticut. And he did say he put the crossbow in the woods then, but he never ever mentioned that he had met one of the killers. That is new on cross-examination. First time we've heard about one of the killers standing in the woods with a walkie-talkie, and Hightower supposedly tripping on a rock and hitting him, and the walkie-talkie flew to the ground and broke, and the kidnapper was furious. But he never said a word to Hightower. Despite all this anger, he never confronted Hightower or said, "Why didn't you get the money?" or "How dare you break my walkie-talkie?" Hightower said it was all in silence, this entire occasion of the incident in the woods with the crossbow and the walkie-talkie. That is new information. It's something that Hightower says he forgot before. He's still confused, he says, and still trying to piece together the details of that weekend.
And something, of course, that the prosecution, I guess, was hoping to elicit. That is, more confusion, discrepancies, poking holes in the Hightower story. We'll continue our coverage of Christopher Hightower's testimony in the Christopher Hightower trial in just a moment. We'll take a break right now. We'll be right back. Hello again. I'm Frank Coletta. If you're just joining us, we are about 1 hour into another day's live coverage of the testimony of Christopher Hightower at Superior Court in Providence. Christopher Hightower, accused of the murders of the Brendel family of Barrington in late September 1991. We're at the morning recess now. Hightower was on the stand for about an hour again this morning. Judge John Sheehan recessed the proceedings just a couple of minutes ago. NewsWatch 10's Diana Kelch is at Superior Court now. Diana, you mentioned earlier that this was apparently a pretty good day for the prosecution in its cross-examination of Hightower, now pointing out more alleged discrepancies. But it seems that Hightower is holding it together. He's not appearing all that distracted, or at least not all that emotional.
You know, Frank, I was carefully watching when some of these discrepancies in his testimony were being pointed out and hammered away by prosecutor Mike Stone. Christopher Hightower managed to keep his voice at an even tone. He did not falter. Even when he was going on and really knew, he must have known that he was caught in telling a story that was different than what he had said even moments before. He just kept answering the questions without getting really flustered about it. I do think that it's interesting to note that he seemed to be answering a lot of questions that he wanted the prosecutor to ask. He did not always answer the questions that were directed towards him, and at one point Judge Sheehan even had to say, "You have to answer the question. You have to answer the question that was asked." Several times the question was read back to him. You know, it kind of reminded me of some of our politicians. They answer what they want you to ask. They don't answer the question if they don't have the answer. Christopher Hightower kind of playing that same cat and mouse game, answering what he thought Mike Stone should be asking, and at times giving an explanation when some of the questions only required yes or no answers.
Yeah, whether you believe Hightower or not, there's certainly no question that he is a savvy, sophisticated witness. He, well, I guess spending all of that time in prison, you have a lot of time to think about what you are going to say when that day finally comes.
Well, you know, Frank, Christopher Hightower has admitted that he has conned people going back over the past decade, has lied to several people. So he's quite adept at thinking on his feet. He's adept at, I'm not saying he's lying, but he certainly could, if he wanted to, con Mike Stone and con the rest of them, or try to. I'm sure he believes that he can do that. He has had a history of doing that before. This may or may not be just one more occasion. That's something the jury's going to have to decide. That certainly is something that Mike Stone wants them to believe. He again continued hammering away, saying, so that was a lie. This is only partially true. That same theme setting Christopher Hightower up as a liar.
That's quite a tightrope that prosecutor Mike Stone has to walk, because he doesn't want to appear to the jury to be unduly badgering Christopher Hightower or being unfair to Christopher Hightower. That's on the one hand. The other hand, he does have to poke holes into the story whenever possible.
Well, the other thing that he has to be careful of, Frank, you know, the defense attorney has talked about perhaps an insanity defense. He has to be very careful that he does not give Christopher Hightower enough rope so that he can start appearing insane. He has to make sure that he portrays him as a con man and a liar, but not an insane man. Christopher
12, I'm leaving. The governor has invited me up to the State House to honor former Governor Roberts' 90th birthday. I was associated with the governor for a number of years, so I'd like to attend. I think it'll only take about 15 minutes out of the court time, but I tell you, we'll put recess at 12:15 tomorrow, just for the noon recess time. Have a good night, and remember my admonitions, please.
The Christopher Hightower murder trial. The commodities broker who was accused of killing Ernest, Alice, and Emily Brendel in September of 1991. Some of the highlights of today's court proceedings: Hightower did have a gun with as many as 38 rounds of ammunition with him. The weekend the Brendels were killed, he was asked, well, if you had this gun and you were worried about the safety of your family, your children, why didn't you use this gun to protect yourself against these 4 people who killed the Brendels? And he said that he wasn't even thinking about it at that time. Several letters written by Hightower and signed...
And now, from the NewsWatch 10 Update Desk.
Hello, I'm Frank Coletta. It's been more than a week since Christopher Hightower first took the stand. He continues his testimony this morning, and don't forget, Channel 10 will be carrying the trial live. That should resume in just a few minutes. Stay with us here on Channel 10 for Southern New England's leading news coverage.
So what's your most...
This is NewsWatch 10's continuing coverage of the Hightower trial.
Hello again. I'm Frank Coletta. We're interrupting our regular programming again this morning to bring you live coverage of the continuing testimony of Christopher Hightower on the stand in his own defense in the trial at Superior Court in Providence that's charging him with the murders of the Brendel family in late 1991. Today's session is going to be shorter than normal, we understand, a morning-only session. NewsWatch 10's Diana Kelch is at the courthouse and has more on that, along with a summary of what happened yesterday before we get down to today's testimony. Diana?
Frank, right now the judge has just entered the room and the jury is already in the courtroom to continue the cross-examination of Christopher Hightower. Just a real brief review before Christopher Hightower takes the stand on what we heard yesterday. We heard yesterday some new details about the murder weekend.
Good morning,
Christopher
ladies and
Hightower now today said that the
Counsel.
killers had walkie-talkies and confronted him in Connecticut. We also found out that Christopher Hightower had a gun during the time when he was in the Brendel home that weekend. We also learned that Christopher Hightower took responsibility for writing some threatening letters when he was in prison after being arrested for the crime. And under cross-examination, he did seem to get confused on some of the details of the story that he has been telling about that weekend. Let's listen now as we are about to resume cross-examination from Prosecutor Mike Stone.
Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Hightower, when we finished yesterday, you had identified States 446, a full exhibit, as another of your writings. You recall that?
Yes. Yes.
This one says, your son-in-law was set up by some very dangerous and ruthless people. This one for Mrs. Slicker?
Yes, it was.
They have already killed one child and will not hesitate to kill 2 more, their grandchildren. They will live as long as Hightower doesn't talk. If he does, no one will be safe. They know about night classes, daughter and husband, long trips to New Hampshire, the condo in Center Harbor, the house in Heatherwood Estates, the house in Jaffrey. They know your every move. Your daughter should learn to listen to her phone calls. What she did not hear was the elements of time and surprise will ensure them a clean kill. Someone could even drown in that lovely secluded pond this summer. There is no place to run and hide from these people. Signed, Links. And it gives Mary Lou Slicker's address. Mr. Hightower, you testified that at some point in time he became very much more aggressive with these letters, and that Michael Giroux was sending these letters out now at your request. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
At some point in time, did you enter into any agreement with Michael Giroux regarding any book or movie rights that you might get?
Yes, I did.
And when was that?
I don't recall the specific time, sir, but I did enter into an agreement with him.
Now, you stated yesterday that it wasn't long after you entered into your original agreement of him continuing these letters that you learned that actually he was forwarding this information to the state police.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Was it before or after that you entered into this agreement?
It was before I entered into the agreement. In order to continue to get Mr. Giroux to send those notes or contact the police, he insisted on having some type of information that would show that I was in actuality going to pay him for what he was doing.
Mr. Hightower, you indicated on direct that it was shortly after you were incarcerated that Mr. Giroux started sending out these ransom letters without your knowledge.
That is correct, yes, sir.
Right after that it was then that you decided that as long as he'd done that, you would become more aggressive and start having him send the threatening letters out.
No, sir. Wasn't decided specifically the way you stated. Would you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. In direct testimony and on your cross-examination, you said that within just a short period of time after you were incarcerated, which was in the end of September of 1991,
Correct.
that Michael Giroux, because of all the media pressure that was on you, on his own, started sending out ransom notes.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And you said that when you found that out, you became furious, but you figured as long as he did it, that you would go along with it and have these notes being sent out by him with your authorship.
No, sir. The original situation that occurred was the fact that Mr. Giroux sent these first 3 letters out without my knowledge. Then I agreed to do a 4th letter with him that was saying that the Brindells were dead, and I didn't want any more involvement with the police. At that point, Mr. Giroux became extremely apologetic, and he apologized for his interference because of the comments that I had made in referring to the fact that there was Chinese mafia involved in this. And at that point, we talked about him and his friends on the outside assisting in providing protection for my family, since I had obviously received no help or protection from the police department.
And that would have been
Very early.
very early on
Yes, sir.
that he started doing this.
Yes, sir.
And then on direct, you said within about 3 weeks of that, you became aware that he was sending these letters and giving them to the state police.
I don't recall a specific time frame. I said it was very shortly after that.
Well, very shortly after that. And that's still before the bodies were located.
Yes, sir.
So before the bodies were located, you found out that Michael Giroux, you say, was turning this information over to the state police.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. You're saying it was before that that you entered into some agreement with him regarding the book and movie rights.
I don't remember when I entered into that agreement with him.
Well, Mr. Hightower, if you knew, as you say, that Michael Giroux was passing this information on to the state police,
Yes, sir.
there would be no reason to enter into any agreement with him, would there?
If I didn't do it, then Mr. Giroux had indicated that he would stop doing what he was doing. And as I said, I tried everything that I possibly could to make sure that my family was protected one way or another, whether it be through threats, letters. Some letters were written to inform them that these people in fact knew where their activities were, where their homes were. I did everything that I possibly could. I tried calling the church. I spoke with the Associate Minister, Rose Amadeo. After I asked her to call the deputy warden and verify what I had told her. The block was put on the telephones. I spoke with Tom Coons. I asked him to do some things for me to try to get my glasses, for example. It took him. He never made communication with the family. It eventually was Mr. Hardiman who was able to secure my glasses for me. I tried everything I possibly could, and when everything failed, then I resorted to what I had available.
When was it that you entered into this agreement with Mr. Giroux?
Which agreement, sir?
The agreement for the book and movie rights.
I don't remember the specific time frame. It was after all of this had been started. Then he started insisting upon some way of being paid.
Paid?
So,
Paid for what?
paid for sending these notes out.
Saying that he wanted to get paid for sending these notes out for you?
Yes, sir, that's what he said.
Mr. Hightower, isn't it a fact that you had no idea that Michael Giroux was sending these notes out but giving them to the state police instead?
I knew that Mr. Giroux was giving these notes to the state police. As I testified earlier, he even picked a fight with one of the inmates for telling me that he was involved with this.
And isn't it a fact, Mr. Hightower, that you had no idea he was from the start turning these writings of yours over to the state police? And that because you actually wanted to have him contact people on the outside who actually kill other people, that you entered into an agreement with him to give him 50% of any book and movie rights that you would accrue on this case?
No, sir, that is not correct.
Hightower, I'm going to show you again, 437, for identification. You said you recognize that?
Yes, sir, I do.
What is that?
That is the note that details the book and movie rights to Mr. Giroux.
What's the date on it?
12/20/91.
Showing you now Exhibit 438. Recognize that?
Yes, sir, I do.
What's that?
It's basically the same.
When did you give him that one?
I do not recall when I gave it to him, sir.
Well, you dispute the date on the bottom there that was given to him in January?
I have no idea, sir.
Do you recall whether or not you gave them to after the first one?
I don't recall which one was first, sir.
Why was it necessary to give him two agreements?
He told me that he had mailed the first agreement out to his people and it had been lost.
Apparently it wasn't lost. You said you knew he was giving these to the state police.
I realize that, yes, sir. I only related to you the information that was told to me. I knew that he was giving them to the state police, but he wanted another one. Didn't matter, so I gave it to him.
Based on Mr. Hightower's testimony, I'd ask these remarks for exhibits, please.
Same objections yesterday, Your Honor, on relevance.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Hightower, did you write those?
Yes, sir, I wrote them.
Show us the way that it is secured evidence.
Drawing your attention first to Exhibit 437. It says, to Mike Giroux from Christopher Hightower, Dear Mike, dated 12/20/91. Please find this note short and self-explanatory. I, Christopher Hightower, do hereby of sound body and mind agree to divide any profits on movie and book rights related to my case, the division being equally shared 50-50. Sincerely, Christopher Hightower.
Ladies and gentlemen, one step back. When I mention it goes to the weight rather than admissibility, that separates our functions. I must decide whether it's admissible. You decide how much weight you want to give any evidence. So that's, in my opinion, a good example of the division we have of our responsibilities. Thank you.
Now, Exhibit 438 says from Christopher Hightower to Mike Giroux. I, Christopher Hightower, with your handwriting, and then in parentheses with your printing, Christopher Hightower. Again, being of sound mind and body, do hereby agree to equally share 50% of the proceeds that arise from book and movie rights that arise from my case with one Mike Giroux, and it has Mike Giroux's name printed. This is a legally binding contract. Signed, Christopher Hightower. In fact, Mr. Hightower, the reason you were willing to sign off half of anything you might accrue from anything is because you wanted Mr. Giroux to hire people on the outside, not to protect the family, but to actually kill them.
No, sir, that is not true. And because I also knew that those were going to the state police, you know there's nothing in relationship to the Link's letters that were passed out.
To have this 447 for identification.
May I see it, please, Mrs. Sure.
Right now, the judge is reading over an exhibit that Mike Stone is asking to present in questioning and cross-examination of Christopher Hightower. Now, this book and movie right contracts that Christopher Hightower had with a fellow inmate, Michael Giroux, in them he says that he would give any movie or book rights about the Brendel murders and his involvement in that, give half of that profit that he may reap from that to Mike Giroux, this fellow inmate. Christopher Hightower says he agreed to that because he wanted Giroux to keep mailing notes out that he says would protect his family. The prosecution has a totally different spin on that, however. Mike Stone, under questioning, says, isn't it true that you actually were promising to give those rights to Mike Giroux because you wanted him to take out a contract on your family's life to have them killed?
You recognize that?
Yes, sir.
Is that your writing?
Yes, sir.
Well, we're off 447.
Like his last answer, Your Honor, no objection.
447 may be marked full, there being no objection.
So Hightower, this one's dated December 23rd. It says December 23rd at 8:40 a.m. And then it's got the phone number 246-0111. What number is that again?
That's the number at the White Church, sir.
And then under that it says, divorce means death. Enjoy your last Christmas. And then under that there's a squiggly line. And then it says, Paul or Wright, J. Patrick Young's DA and John Hardiman. Hightower did not kill the Brendels. I know because I was there. When I have evidence to convict the other three, I will turn myself in. Then it further goes on to say, a week later, have both DA and PD go to a public place together. Set up a certain date and time, because you don't trust either one alone. Call them and tell them who you are and where you are, and you're ready to turn yourself in with the evidence to exonerate Hightower. And then it goes on to say, naturally, just prior to calling, the target is hit. A pen in his hand with a partial note. Hightower innocent. New York Tom kills Brendells. Swiss account. And then a long squiggly line below that. Isn't it a fact, Mr. Hightower, that you didn't know Mr. Giroux was sending out any of these letters to the state police? You thought he was sending them to people who you had agreed to contract to give half of your book and movie rights to hire to have some people killed to make it look like they were the ones who committed these crimes instead of you.
No, sir, that is not true.
Isn't this a set of instructions?
I think it got you to investigate the individual that's mentioned there.
Mr. Hightower, I asked you, isn't this a set of instructions?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to publish this to the jury, please.
Sure. You can sit down, Mr. Hightower.
Thank you, sir.
The jury now passing around the note that Mike Stone just read. You see defense attorney Robert George there, his head on his hand, listening. That note, a set of instructions admitted by Christopher Hightower that he wrote in his own handwriting, a set of instructions for killing of some people on the outside that he wrote when he was inside of prison. He gave this set of instructions to a fellow inmate, the idea being that the fellow inmate was going to mail these out to some people on the outside, supposed assassins that would then carry out these instructions to kill his own family, mailed out 2 days before Christmas. Now, Christopher Hightower continues to say that he knew that they were never getting to the outside. He says he knew that Michael Giroux was sending these instructions and letters to the state police and not to the outside, and continues to stand by his story that he was writing these very threatening letters, becoming more and more aggressive in these threatening letters, because he says he wanted the state police to protect his family. Mike Stone trying to get him to acknowledge that he did not know the state police were involved.
Yeah, Diana, this is Frank Coletta back in the studio. It sounds, according to Prosecutor Stone anyway, that Stone is trying to paint Giroux as some kind of a state police informant or something along those lines.
Well, Michael Giroux was. We know that Michael Giroux was giving these letters to the state police. That is a matter of fact. What he's trying to say, and these are members of the Brendel family here that you see, Ernest Brendel's sister, Alice Brendel's brother, and the sister-in-law in the middle. I think that what Michael Stone is trying to say, Frank, is not so much that Michael Giroux was an informant, because we know he was handing the letters over to the state police from inside of prison, but he is trying to say that Christopher Hightower did not know that he was an informant, that Christopher Hightower, in fact, was plotting more murders while he was inside the ACI. Murders to try and get other people to commit other hits that in the end would exonerate him in some way.
Interesting to me, Diana, that note pledging a 50-50 split of the book and movie profits between Hightower and Giroux. In that note, Hightower notes that he is of sound mind and body, quite different from what appears to be an effort to label him not guilty by reason of having an unsound mind, if you will.
Right, and you notice Mike Stone emphasized that word when he read it, being of sound mind, because there has been talk, and the defense attorney has said in the past that he may go with an insanity defense, so that may be relevant that Hightower himself considered himself sane. Judge Sheehan here, waiting. He's been carefully screening all of the evidence as it goes through him, especially the letters that were written and the notes that were written from the prison, and he did have a quick comment, and he explained to the jury that he's decided to allow these notes about the 50-50 split of book and movie rights based on two separate factors, and it's up to the jury to decide whether these are admissible. Judge Sheehan will decide that they are, but it will be up to the jury to decide the weight they put on these documents, how important they are when deciding their verdict. The judge doesn't make that decision. He only decides that they're admissible, and he has ruled that they are.
Diana, the microphones that are placed in the courtroom, there are a limited number of them, I suspect, and depending on where the prosecutor is speaking from, sometimes he walks across the courtroom, we don't always hear all of the words. Now, those of us watching this on TV, at least I had trouble hearing part of what Stone was saying concerning that letter, the message sent to the church. Did you catch that? Something about Christmas and death or something along those lines?
It was a set of instructions that were sent out by Christopher Hightower, given to Michael Giroux, the fellow inmate, to supposedly be mailed or, as we know, given to the state police. It was timed at 8:40 a.m. and the telephone number of the white church was on there, and it was dated 12/23, which was 2 days before Christmas and 2 months after the murders of the Brendells. The first words on the note were, "Divorce means death. Enjoy your last Christmas." One would assume that he's writing this in reference to his wife, Susan Hightower, who, as we know, was moving to divorce him at that time.
Yeah, that's tied in with some of the letters or communications we heard yesterday,
Right.
trying to convince her not to go through with that divorce, threatening the death of family members if she did.
Right, saying, reconcile with your husband or else you will be killed and the boys will be the first to go. His own children, Hightower's own 2 boys, that still live in Barrington now.
Diana, the session today is only a half day, is that correct?
My understanding, Frank, is that they will be breaking early for lunch at 12:15 because the judge has somewhere that he needs to go. Now, I'm not quite sure if they will be coming back after for 2 o'clock, but I can tell you we are thinking, and the word we're hearing is that cross-examination of Christopher Hightower will most likely wrap up before lunch. Now, that is really something that can change either way. It will depend on the answers that he gives these 2 men, Patrick Youngs and Michael Stone, the 2 prosecutors that have been working on this case. These 2 men have been going round the clock on this, and it's a large case that they have put together, very detailed, very methodical. The state police sitting alongside them and in back of them helping out in preparation of that case.
I wonder if this cross-examination is going to end in TV drama or L.A. law fashion with the questions, did you murder Ernest Brendel? Did you murder Alice Brendel, etc.?
Well, we heard those asked on direct testimony, as you know, a couple of times by Robert George and Christopher Hightower. The answers were no, no, no. You know, Michael Stone has been saying, isn't it a fact that you didn't know? Isn't it a fact that this, you know, so he may very well wrap up with that kind of drama. I would be surprised if he doesn't ask those questions. I don't know if it's going to be a L.A. law type of finale. Sometimes things that happen in television don't always happen in reality.
Well, having covered court trials for many years, I know that I've never seen an L.A. law type exchange in a real courtroom in real life. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to explain who it is we're looking at, people sitting on the sidelines over there. Some of them are attorneys or friends of attorneys. I believe the woman there is a psychologist that will be later on testifying on a rebuttal for the state, so she's been very carefully listening to what Christopher Hightower has been saying while he is on the stand.
I know, Diana, that in typical or standard kinds of court operations, they have a metal detector at least one of the court entrances, the Leach Courthouse there on Benefit Street. As a matter of fact, there are 2. There's one metal detector on the Benefit Street side, and there's another one on the North Main Street side of the courthouse. Has security been increased in any way because of the interest in this trial?
When there were lines outside and when Christopher Hightower took the stand, starting last week, there were extra sheriffs inside of the courtroom. The metal detectors outside, of course, have always been in full activation and continue to be. But there were, I can tell you, extra sheriffs in the courtroom when Christopher Hightower finally took the stand, and partially because there was a very large crowd of people that were standing outside. A lot of people wanted to hear what he had to say, wanted to see what his demeanor was on the stand. Those lines have died down. Nobody's standing out in line today. Maybe their curiosity about seeing this man accused of murdering an entire family has diminished somewhat.
Well, I suppose they've realized it's easier to just watch it on TV.
Well, especially if you're standing out there. Some of the people had brought their lunch, were standing in line, and they never got a seat, so they really couldn't see anything. So it ended up being a mission in futility.
What about the security for the defendant? Back when Joe Mollicone, for instance, was first brought back to this area and was transported from the ACI to the courthouse for various court hearings, at times we saw a veritable SWAT team of law enforcement and security people surrounding him. They were wearing flak jackets. He was wearing bulletproof vests, and they had the belts of ammunition and the rifles and all of that. Is this kind of thing the case with Christopher Hightower also?
No, that security is not even there for Joe Mollicone anymore. You may have seen them. They come in every morning together. They're handcuffed together from the ACI, and it's just the normal bunch of sheriffs and marshals that are transporting them as they would any other prisoner. There hasn't been any extra security for them other than the 2 sheriffs. You probably have seen them sitting in the back. We had a shot of them just a minute ago sitting in back of the prosecutor's table, who have have been escorting Christopher Hightower in and out. You see them there every day. But there has not been flak jackets and SWAT teams, and that kind of security isn't even there for Joe Mollicone anymore. I think maybe things are a little more relaxed in that regard.
Back to Michael Giroux. If you know, was his name ever on the witness list, or did we see him already, or will we? Is he expected to testify or show up here?
He hasn't testified yet, Frank, and quite truthfully, I do not know if his name is on the witness list. You know, a lot of times they put everybody's name that they could possibly think about calling on the witness list. For example, the defense had 25 people on the witness list, and we know that he really doesn't intend to call that many, may call 2 or 4, not the 25, but they're required to put all the names on there. And prosecution, even on their own case, has put close to 80 witnesses on the stand. Now, they will have rebuttal witnesses, and they may want to call Michael Giroux, so I'd assume his name will be on the list, but I'm not sure if he will be called.
I asked you this yesterday just to give folks an idea of how much time might be left in the proceedings. I know you said you thought that the Hightower testimony might end yesterday. Not blaming you, there's no way to really gauge these kind of things. I know the prosecutors even are just playing it by ear sometimes as they go along. If new topic areas come up, well, they'll throw in some additional questions. But do we suspect that, you mentioned that he's near an end, do we suspect that the trial itself is nearing its end, middle of next week or what have you?
Now, just to cover myself, I will tell you that I did talk to some people on the prosecution team, and they said they really don't even know, as you said, when they'll finish their cross-examination. It depends on Christopher Hightower's answers. If he answers something that opens a whole new door, then they feel they have to go in after that. So a lot of it depends on the answers that this man sitting in the witness box, this defendant, will give to them. How the proceedings of the trial will go is going to be according to procedure, which will be Christopher Hightower will finish up on cross-examination, and then the defense will be able to call the remaining witnesses he has. We know he intends to put a psychologist on. He may put on some civilian witnesses. That will be his determination of his case, and I'm sure that may change depending upon how the cross-examination wraps up and whether he feels he needs to put more witnesses on. After the defense is done with its case, then the prosecution will have rebuttal witnesses. Just one reminder, after cross-examination of Christopher Hightower, the defense can go back on redirect. So we may see Robert George back up there again asking Christopher Hightower more questions of his own. So it's something that can be very long or it can be very short depending upon how the case has gone. Certainly, this examination of Christopher Hightower has taken a long time. I think now we're in our 5th or 6th day of this, 6th day. And
this is just an amazingly large, bulky amount of information that the jury has to consider. This is just mind-boggling, the days of testimony just from Hightower, and that doesn't even take into consideration everything they heard before Hightower took the stand. That's right. We heard 400, I think we're up to 450 pieces of evidence, just straight evidence introduced, and like we said, 80 prosecution witnesses, and a lot of details, many details about mundane things like sales receipts from McDonald's, all tracing Christopher Hightower's steps through that weekend trying to tie him into the Brendel murders. There was a lot of circumstantial evidence, and that circumstantial evidence carries just as much weight as some direct testimony will have, even if you have witnesses that saw the crime. Circumstantial evidence is to be given under the rules equal weight. Diana, the Hightower trial was canceled earlier this week for the observance of a Jewish holiday. Tomorrow's Good Friday. Are they going to have court tomorrow, or is it canceled until next week? There will be no court tomorrow because of the holiday, so the jury will get a break. They'll be able to go through the Easter weekend. Initially, there was some concern that they might even start deliberations and be stuck, trying to deliberate or have a break over Easter. But in fact, now it looks like today we'll have more testimony, a break for a long weekend, and then back in court on Monday with more witnesses. So this is really drawing out longer than I think most people had anticipated. Okay, the jury gets a break for the Easter weekend, and we're going to take a break right now. We'll resume our coverage of the Hightower trial in just a moment here on Channel 10. We're back with continuing coverage of the Hightower trial, the trial of Christopher Hightower on charges of murdering the Brendel family of Barrington. I'm told that the jury has apparently completed its perusal of those documents, so let's check out what's going on in the courtroom now. There's Judge John Sheehan perusing one of the documents in question. Did the jury, in fact, complete what they were doing, to your knowledge, Diana?
The jury finished looking at the scribbled note that Christopher Hightower had given to Michael Giroux, the inmate, the note with instructions for more murders on the outside that Michael Giroux was given. And now we are moving on to another document now that Mike Stone will be asking Christopher Hightower about.
449 for identification. Ask you to look at that. You recognize that?
Yes, sir, it is.
449 be marked full, there being no objection.
Hightower, this exhibit 449 starts off. The system is looking for the passing of letters through the mail. That we know. So be careful. You might want to arrange to send a letter out with a name and code so the letter will not be opened by the addressee, but by whom the letter is really for. This could be arranged either via the telephone or a letter. Isn't it fact this letter was given to Mr. Giroux after all the other letters we've looked at?
I don't know what the time frame was.
Now let me continue with the text of the letter. Then it says, second, I'm glad underlined, to see the schedule, the word schedule underlined, of events, and that's underlined also. The ones closest to me are in the lead as primary subjects. The secondary subject should not be discussed next week unless all the detail can be worked out. A phone call needs to be made. You will revel in its madness and beauty. Make sure you destroy this and envelope. I just received my mail. I go to court on January 21st, 1992, divorce hearing. Arrange subject 1 no later than Monday night, before the court hearing, if at all possible. Does that refresh your recollection of 1/21/92 as to when this was written?
Then it was written sometime before January 21st, 1992.
Very soon before, wasn't it?
I don't know the time frame, no, sir.
And isn't it a fact that subject number 1 here refers to your wife, Susan Hightower, at the time?
That is correct, yes, sir.
This is 451 for identification.
451, be marked for identification.
On pretrial motions before this trial started, Robert George had fought to stop the introduction of the Lynx letters that were written from the prison and any other literature that Christopher Hightower had written from within the prison. These kind of letters that can be very damaging to Christopher Hightower, letters showing that he was plotting murders from inside the prison, trying to take out hits on his wife, his children, his in-laws. Of course, Christopher Hightower says he wasn't planning to do that. And Robert George had lost that pretrial motion, so now the jury and we are able to hear this evidence. It's not something the defense attorney, I'm sure, would have wanted out.
Some of those words were just chilling. referring to the phone call, you will revel in its madness and beauty. That's haunting stuff.
It is. Revel in the madness and beauty of a plotted murder against his wife, that he did not want the divorce. He wanted her dead before the divorce, at least according to these letters. Now, you have to keep in mind, Christopher Hightower said he didn't mean any of it. He was only doing this because he knew the state police were getting the letters and he wanted his family protected. That's the question you got to figure out. Murderer or protector? Christopher Hightower, which one?
This is a difficult decision for this jury to make.
It will be difficult, Frank. I think they've heard quite a bit of evidence, like you said, a mountain of evidence, and they're going to have to sort through it. And really, it's the credibility of Christopher Hightower is what they're looking at.
The Hightower I'm going to show you now states 451 for identification. Ask you to look at that, please. You recognize the writing on that?
Yes, sir, I do. Yes, sir, it is.
Please answer, Your Honor, no objection.
451 will be marked full, there being no objection.
The Hightower states 451 begins, the parable of life is that all things on earth have a beginning, that is a birth, a middle, that is an aging, and an end, death. The process of this biotic biosphere are all relative. Thus, sometimes the parable is interrupted prematurely. The story is inconsequential. It required no detailed planning to write. Results are all that really matters, achieved through its simplistic nature. I have heard that the surroundings have become very smug and comfortable. This pattern needs to be broken immediately. Another story at another time would certainly require more planning. As you know, the cops think I and an associate are writing letters to the outside. This can't be so because my attorney told me not to write anything. I personally believe that if anyone on the outside is writing anything, they will continue because they know what to say, and they have, I'm sure, the paper, envelope, and stamps. Why waste the money on telephone calls when you can write? That way, Ma Bell won't get rich. So perhaps one telephone call to make sure there is no misunderstanding would be appropriate. I mean, do you believe that I've been put into a cell by myself so I can be watched to make sure I'm not mailing anything out? Now, how do you think they can explain the arrival of more mail? I wouldn't be surprised if Lincoln Arman himself and John Hardiman became involved. But you can bet your ass I'm not writing anything. Whoever is out there, I'm sure, will send one more piece of mail. Obviously, there are two stories to this episode. Hopefully, one can be told now and the other planned out a little more. Thanks for listening to my babble. You could probably teach a dog to fight as well as I. But then, what are friends for? I know, yeah. But in my case, they must be female. See you later. Hightower, isn't it a fact that you knew Ernie Brendel would never, ever withdraw that letter he sent to the NFA and the CFTC about his complaint?
No, sir, that is not true.
And isn't it a fact, Mr. Hightower, that you went to 51 Middle Highway on that Thursday night with that crossbow with a plan to kill Mr. Brendel?
No, sir, that is not true.
And that at some time around 10:30 or so, you tried to break into the back door with that black pry-bar that was found in your briefcase, but you set off the alarm, so you panicked and went back out to the woods.
No, sir, that is not true.
And you waited there in the rain and the mud to see if anybody came. And when nobody came, you broke into the garage to spend the rest of the night. Isn't that true?
No, sir, that is not true.
And then after Mr. Brendel got back from taking his wife to work the next morning, Friday, when he pulled the car into the garage, you took the crossbow and you killed him.
No, sir, that is not true.
And isn't it a fact that after that you took his bicycle, and you rode it to 1 Jones Circle, you didn't take it right up to the house because you didn't want to be seen, and then you washed those clothes that you used? Isn't that right?
I took the bicycle and I washed my clothes. That is correct, yes,
That's
sir.
right. And then you were told there was a call. That call was from the NFA, from Mr. Mazza. And he told you, after you told him that Ernie had withdrawn his complaint, that you needed a letter. And then the unexpected happened, didn't it? When the constable arrived, and that made it unable for you to take the station wagon and leave 1 Jones Circle, didn't it? So you rode that bike back to 51 Middle Highway.
No, sir, I didn't.
And because your plan was interrupted by the unexpected of the constable arriving, you were later than you expected, like you told Susan Hoder.
I was expected back.
And then after you got back, you went in the house and looked for money and didn't find any. So you called the Rhode Island Hospital Trust Status account lines, didn't you?
No, sir, I did not.
And when you found out how much money was in the account, you wrote out those checks and you forged their names.
No, sir. I wrote out the checks. I signed the checks normally with Mr. Brendel's name. There was no attempt to forge his signature.
And then after that, because the time was getting late, you knew Emily would be coming home from school. You had to figure a way to get her, didn't you?
No, sir.
And when you found out at school that because of a field trip she wasn't there, you went to the Y to try to pick them up. But when they wouldn't let her out, you had to go back and get the driver's license off Mr. Brendel's body, didn't you?
No, sir, I did not.
And then you picked Emily up from the Y, and then you took her back home. And then Alice would be coming home from work. And that created another problem for you, didn't it?
No, sir.
And when Alice came home, you got them both secured someplace in that house, probably in the cellar, didn't you?
No, sir, I did not.
And then you went out and ran your little errands.
I only did what I was told by Mr. Brendel up until Saturday evening.
And that Saturday morning, because you knew of Ernie's weekend plans from the telephone message that Jim Page left the night before, you forced Alice to call him and tell him a phony story about Ernie's mother being sick.
I had no knowledge of that telephone call, sir. I wasn't in the house at the time it took place.
It was on the answering machine, wasn't it?
I had no knowledge of Mrs. Brendel placing a telephone call to Mr. Page.
And then you disposed of those bodies in shallow graves, less than a half a mile from the Brendel residence, didn't you?
I had no idea where the graves were located, sir.
And then because you couldn't find enough money in the house or get enough money out of those bank accounts, you decided to get greedy and you went down to Providence, Connecticut to try to weasel more money out of them, didn't you?
No, sir, that is not true.
And when they couldn't come up with the money, you knew they would call the FBI. On that way back to Rhode Island from that long trip, you knew in your heart they were going to call the authorities. And that's why you called it back at 6 o'clock in the morning to tell them not to bother, isn't it?
No, sir. I knew they were going to call the FBI, but that is not the reason I called them back.
Isn't it a fact, Mr. Hightower, that you lied to the Scriabins, that you lied to the police, and now you've lied to this jury?
I did what I was told. Since I've been here, to the best of my recollection, I have told the jury the truth and what has happened.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You may step down, Mr.
Thank you, sir.
We'll take our mid-morning recess. Once again, please do not discuss the
Now we're going to recess. Christopher Hightower done with cross-examination. As we said, he may be back on the stand after the recess for redirect by his own attorney, Robert George, if George has any more questions. Christopher Hightower whispering now to his attorney. Those were the questions that we were waiting for from the prosecution. Mike Stone shot them out like bullets. Did you murder them? Isn't it a fact that you waited in the dark? Isn't it a fact that you went to get Emily? You knew you had a problem when Alice was coming home. Christopher Hightower, except for his eyes darting a little bit to the jury and to the judge, calmly answered each one. No, I did not. I did not commit the murders. Didn't break down, did not seem to be uncomfortable with the questions, Frank.
That was certainly the dramatic crescendo we were speculating about during the last break in the court testimony. And did you notice, as he answered the final question, when Stone said to Hightower, haven't you been lying all the time you were on the stand? Hightower, I think for the first time, at least the first time this morning, looked directly at the jury and said, I have told the jury the truth. Throughout
to the best of my knowledge, everything I've said here to the jury has been the truth. Of course, we know he admitted to lying to the Scriabins and to the police and to many other people, but he's hoping the jury believes that this time, he is being truthful.
Seems to me that Prosecutor Stone read that last letter, that last of the letters, purely for the dramatic effect, didn't he, Diana? Because he asked no questions about them. That letter about the parable, about
the parable of life and the interruption. He has a very poetic beginning to the letter, and that may be. I think he wanted it in as evidence, and he wanted the jury to hear it. Once it's in as full evidence, of course, he doesn't have to ask questions. He can merely read it to the jury, so they know the kind of ramblings that Christopher Hightower was writing while he was in prison.
This is the mid-morning break, is it not, Diana? The
This will be
15
the
minutes
recess,
or so?
yes. There'll be a recess, 15, 20 minutes or so, Frank.
And
And then when we come back, again, we don't know. Will Christopher Hightower be back on the stand? Hopefully we'll have a chance to check with Robert George during this break and see if he intends to do any redirect on Christopher Hightower.
And while the court session is in its mid-morning break, we shall return to regular Channel 10 programming for a few minutes. That would be, I think, the Joan Rivers Show, and then we'll resume our coverage of the Hightower trial a little bit later this morning, perhaps with Patrice Wood sitting in this chair. I'm Frank Coletta. Thank you for joining us.
You came back with all those stories.
This is NewsWatch 10's continuing coverage of the Hightower trial.
Good morning, I'm Patrice Wood. We understand that Christopher Hightower is going back on the stand this morning. We heard a little earlier that Prosecutor Michael Stone had finished his questioning, but now the defense attorney is going to be asking some questions as well. And this is Robert George doing the questioning.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. George.
Robert George is entitled to redirect Patrice of his own witness. Christopher Hightower is the defense witness, and he was asked questions on direct testimony. Now Robert George, it appears, is going to start asking more questions, maybe 10 or 15 minutes worth of questions,
Yes, sir.
on the letters that were written from the prison.
3 days ago, discussing with Mr. Stone the transcripts that you use to get into a program out at Wright State.
Yes, sir, I do.
Now, is it your testimony that those transcripts were forged,
Yes, sir, that is correct.
created for the occasion to get into Wright State?
Yes, sir, that is true.
Why did you do that?
I wanted to be able to provide better support, better life for my family.
Is that the reason you were doing it at the time?
Yes, sir, it is.
Didn't you consider other reasons, other things to do about that, like getting better grades?
Yes, sir, I certainly did. I figured that if I didn't earn the grades, that I certainly wouldn't pass the coursework and I would flunk out, so I felt that I was hurting no one but myself.
Did you succeed in that course out at Wright State after you got in?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was it ever discovered that you had forged the initial transcripts to get into that program?
I have no idea whether it was discovered at that time or not.
So you received a degree from Wright State despite the fact that you used forged transcripts to get in?
Yes, sir, I did. In the master's program, I believe that my total overall GPA was a 3.86. And when I left the PhD program, the combined master's and PhD GPA was somewhere in the neighborhood of about a 3.76. I'm not positive of those figures, but I know I only had a couple of B's. The rest were earned A's.
And those were your real grades, right?
Those were real grades, yes, sir.
Now, you got a PhD at Wright State, too?
No, sir. I left the program due to the problems that were sustained while I was out there. The fact that I no longer felt that I had the support of my wife the house fire and so forth.
Did the Investment Club of Ohio have anything to do with you moving?
No, sir. We were still free to remain in Ohio, even though we had decided that we would provide the house to these individuals. We could have stayed there if we wanted to.
Sir, this investment, do you remember talking to Mr. Stone on cross-examination about the Investment Club of Ohio?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, at some point, you ran through about $102,000. Is that your testimony?
There was I believe there was $102,000 in the account overall.
What did it go down to before?
I believe it was, according to Mr. Stone, around $8,800, $9,000.
Now, sir, were you using those funds that were missing for your own personal use?
No, sir. I never took any of the funds for my own personal use. Those funds were lost in the marketplace.
And did you reimburse the people from that club?
Yes, sir, per our agreement.
How did you do that?
By the use of, by selling our house and returning the proceeds from the sale of the house to the investors.
Were you ever charged with any wrongdoing criminally out there in Ohio as a result of what you're telling us about?
No, sir, I was not.
Were you ever sued by the Investment Club of Ohio?
No, sir, I was not.
Were you a registered commodities broker at the time?
At the time that occurred, no, I was not. I became registered after that because I realized the mistake I had done.
Now, do you recall, approximately 2 days ago, Mr. Stone showing you a business plan or some kind of plan for Hightower Investments out in Dayton?
Yes, sir, I do.
There's reference in that, sir, do you recall, to a newsletter, an advisory newsletter?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Could you tell us what the difference was between that newsletter and the newsletter you were discussing with Mr. Grandel?
The particular newsletter that was in that business plan dealt specifically with being able to report to the public authentic trades that had taken place, that had been confirmed, and in order to do that, you needed a system that was developed. This was a real newsletter. The newsletter that Mr. Brindell wanted to produce was a newsletter that was to be used specifically for the use of laundering drug money.
Mr. Grandel, can you give that idea?
Yes, sir.
And you recall Mr. Stone asking you about the Riker Labs?
Yes, sir, I do.
You recall him asking you about your last 3 to 6 months on the job and not seeing your customers?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Do you also recall testifying that you were top salesman of some sort at Riker?
Never, I don't think I recall, I do not recall saying I was top salesman. I recall saying that with one of the particular drugs that we sold, Norflex, when I had the last meeting with my district manager, Joseph Calory, he told me and showed me the results of the sales of that particular drug, saying that I was 3rd in the nation. I was also listed, I believe, as 9th in the nation with the product of another product that we sold called Buff Puff. I did not. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There was another individual in the territory that was helping promote the sales of that particular product. So I do not feel that I earned total respect for the sales of that specific product. I had assistance with that one product.
Sir, do you recall seeing 2 letters that Mr. Stone asked you about in regard to recommendations for the Right State program?
Yes, sir, I do.
Do you recall testifying that they were in your handwriting?
Yes, sir, they were.
Are those the actual recommendations that you sent to Right State?
Those particular pieces of letters, no, sir.
What were they?
They were draft.
Well, did recommendations go into Right State?
Yes, sir, they did.
And who were they from?
They were also from me, sir.
Now, those 2 drafts that you showed us,
Yes, sir.
they were written by you for purposes of recommending you for the program?
Yes, sir, they were.
And they were part of the transcript situation you testified about 4 days ago?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Now, I believe it was yesterday, Mr. Hightower, you recall testifying about a handgun, a Glock of some sort?
Yes, sir.
You also recall being asked questions by Sergeant or Detective Lazaro in this case?
Yes, sir, I do.
And have you seen the statement that you gave to Sergeant Lazaro?
Yes, sir, I have seen that statement.
Was anyone present when you gave that statement to Sergeant Lazaro?
Yes, sir. Like I said, for the first 10 or 15 minutes, Inspector McGraw was present, and when Inspector McGraw left after his comments, Special Agent Kevin Ray Eaton came in and took notes in reference to the statement that I was giving to Detective Lazaro.
Did you tell Detective Lazaro about the Glock?
Yes, sir, I did. It's in my statement.
Now, you signed that statement from Detective Lazaro, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did Kevin Ray Eaton or Agent Kevin Ray Eaton have a statement he wanted you to sign?
He did not provide me with a statement to sign, no, sir.
But in any case, sir, was Special Agent Eaton present while you gave this lengthy statement to Detective Lazaro?
That was the only time that Inspector Eaton, to the best of my recollection, was present with me. Yes, sir. Was during that statement with Detective Lazaro.
I have a question. Sir? To show you Exhibit 59 full in this case, sir.
Yes, sir.
Did you tell Detective Lazaro about the bag of peach moss and the arrowhead that Mr. Stone asked you about?
Yes, sir, I did.
Can you show us where in that statement that's located?
It's not in the statement, sir.
Was Kevin Ray Eaton present when you gave that statement?
Yes, sir, he was.
Your Honor, I'd ask, this copy is for you, Your Honor. I'd ask the month for identification on
What letter is it?
C, defendant C.
C.
Robert George attempting to buffer some of the damage that may have been done by the prosecution's lengthy cross-examination of Christopher Hightower, trying to buffer some of the admissions that Christopher Hightower made about forging transcripts and about lying, and even buffer the evidence that Christopher Hightower had a gun in his possession, saying, you told the police about that from the beginning, didn't you?
Yes, sir. This is the statement that I gave to the Barrington Police Department, almost in its entirety. There are only 2 errors in this statement relative to the information that I provided.
Who's the signatory of that? Or the author of that?
Kevin Ray Eaton, sir.
So you didn't sign this statement?
Did I sign it? No, sir, I did not.
So I direct your attention to the second paragraph, first page.
Yes, sir.
Halfway into the second paragraph,
Yes, sir.
beginning with the word Hightower and ending at the end of the paragraph.
Yes, sir.
Is it reflected there that you told the police about the bag of peat moss and the broken arrowhead?
That is correct, it is, sir.
What did you tell, without reading it, what did you tell, based on your own memory, Kevin Eaton and Sergeant Lazaro about the bag of peat moss and the arrowhead?
I told them exactly where the bag of peat moss was located up against the wall, where the crossbow had been test-fired into that bag of peat moss, and that the arrowhead had broken off when I tried to remove the arrow from the wall, that there were a total of 6 arrows that had been purchased. When we ultimately left the garage, 5 arrows were placed with the crossbow at that point.
I direct your attention, well, before I do that, sir, do you remember talking to Detective Lazaro about the events of Saturday evening or things you did on Saturday evening or Sunday morning?
Yes, sir.
And you recall Mr. Stone asking you about those same things during your cross-examination?
Yes, sir, I do.
Without getting specific, sir, did you talk to Sergeant Lazaro and Kevin Ray Eaton about some of the things you did between Saturday evening and Sunday morning?
Saturday, yes, I believe I did.
Now, directing your attention to page 3, the report from Mr. Eaton. Just read to yourself, sir, beginning at the top of the page, that begins on Saturday,
Yes, sir.
and ending at the bottom of the page. Just read to yourself.
You may notice a change in Hightower's positioning of his body under redirect. He certainly seems more relaxed. He knows that this is a friendly attorney now putting the questions to him, and he has angled his body now towards the jury so that when he answers the questions, he almost looks at them out of the corner of his eye or straight face on towards them. Under cross-examination from Prosecutor Michael Stone, he only glanced at the jury, darting his eyes kind of sideways towards them. Now when he answers questions, you'll notice he looks
After reading
directly
that
at the
yourself,
jury,
sir, did you
or at least
tell
positions his body towards them.
Kevin Eaton about some of the events between Saturday and Sunday.
Yes, sir, I did.
You left a great deal out, didn't you?
Yes, sir, I did.
Why did you leave it out at that time?
Because at this particular point, there have been a lot of discrepancies between what I was telling Detective Lazaro, the fact that Inspector McGraw had not stated that I was no longer a suspect, but the fact that he was going to prove I was the one who was involved with the Brendel disappearance. My rights, I felt, had been extremely violated, and they were not.
Objection.
Well, sustained. You have a motion?
Strike the answer as
All right.
being non-responsive.
Please disregard that answer. As I told you before, ladies and gentlemen, whether Mr. Hightower's rights have been violated or not is strictly your decision to make after you've heard all the testimony.
Directing your attention to page 7 of Kevin Ray Eaton's report.
Yes, sir.
Next to last paragraph, did you read that to yourself?
Yes, sir.
And did you tell Kevin Ray Eaton about the Glock?
Yes, sir, I did.
You have an independent memory as to what you told him about the Glock without looking at the statement.
I believe I told him where it was located, where it was in my office.
Just for your information, a Glock
The
is
last
the name of the
bit
specific
of
gun
information that I
that
had,
Christopher
it was located
Hightower
in my
owns and had with him that weekend.
And that there were 2 loaded clips, but the clips were not in the gun itself.
Directing your attention to the last page of that same statement, sir.
Yes, sir.
Next to last paragraph.
Page 7,
8.
page 8. Next to the last paragraph? Yes, sir.
Do you have any discussion with Special Agent Eaton about the people you thought were following you?
Yes, sir, I did.
What did you tell him?
I told him that that Monday morning I was specifically aware of 2 cars that were following me. One of them had a license plate number of either M16 or M19, and I believe it was a blue Pontiac, I wasn't sure. The second car was a white Camaro or Firebird, and the license plate number on that particular car was MW365 or something. I don't recall what I told him, but I did tell them that I had written the numbers down on a piece of paper that was located in my office, and I told them where that piece of paper could be found on top of my filing cabinet.
Sir, I'd like to ask you about just a couple of more things. Remember Mr. Stone asking you about the loss of your license, your commodities license?
Yes, sir, I do.
Had Mr. Brendel proceeded with his complaint, would you have lost your license?
Probably not.
I'll allow it stand.
Had you lost your license, would you have been able to continue working as a broker?
Yes, sir, I would have.
What's your understanding of that? How would you do that without a license?
The only time that you need to be licensed or regulated by the industry is if you're providing trading recommendations to the general public where you have more than 15 clients involved. I could have provided and or traded accounts up to 15 accounts without being licensed. Since I only had 3 or 4 accounts, 4 or 5 accounts throughout my entire career as a commodities trader, I was not overly concerned with that situation whatsoever.
Your testimony here today, sir, that you did not kill the Brendells?
That is correct, sir. I had nothing to do with the deaths of the Brendel family.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Your Honor.
Very good. Hightower, you stated you left Dayton, Ohio, because of the problems with the fire, problems you're having with your wife. The fact of the matter is, it was in the fall of 19, what, that you flunked your PhD.
I did not completely flunk the PhD. I was given an extension of time in order to prepare further for the exams, so if I so desired.
That was in the fall of when?
That would be 1985, I believe.
But you stayed in Ohio, and you didn't move until right after you settled with the Dayton Investors Guild.
That is correct. My wife and I wanted a fresh start.
You say you reimbursed them. Isn't it a fact, Mr. Hightower, that the only thing they got back from you was the $8,000 and the deed to your house, and basically, out of all that, they wound up with only $22,000 on the original $100,000 investment?
That was the way it was structured because that was the first opportunity they would have had to close the accounts per our agreement.
Now, the agreement, Mr. Hightower, was 50%.
The agreement was 50% with closing of the positions, and that was the first available opportunity. Had it been a higher fee, I would have provided those funds to them.